I'm going to make a chocolate bomb. This is a chocolate bowl-like cake that has chocolate mousse in the middle, and then it's covered with this chocolate glaze that hardens so you crack right into it. So first we're going to start with the cake. I have a half-sheet pan that I'm going to spray with a little bit of cooking spray and put parchment paper down on so that the cake doesn't stick to the bottom. And the reason I spray the reason I spray cooking spray is so that the parchment paper sticks to the pan and doesn't move when we pour the batter in. So next we're going to work on the dry ingredients. I have a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. I have 3/4 cup of regular all-purpose flour. Stir those together. I have a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then I'm going to add a teaspoon of baking powder. We're going to stir that all together, and then we're going to head over to the mixer to work on the eggs. So I've got 5 whole eggs in my mixer. I'm going to turn this on and get them just frothy. And then we're going to add 3/4 cup of sugar. And we're going to beat the eggs with the sugar until they become really thick and they almost triple in volume. Okay, so you see how they're frothy? We're going to add our 3/4 cup of sugar. And then I'm going to turn this on high. And this is going to take about 7 minutes. So we're going to let those triple in volume, and then we'll add our vanilla. So our eggs have tripled in size, and now we are going to add a teaspoon of vanilla. Whip that in, and then we immediately need to fold in our dry ingredients. Otherwise, the eggs have a chance to fall, and then you don't have a very good sponge cake. So we have mixed our vanilla in for about a minute. Now we are going to slowly and gently fold in our dry ingredients so that we don't break up the eggs. But we incorporate the flour, so the chalk and the baking powder and others, so that it can rise and make the perfect sponge cake as the basis for our chocolate bomb. So it's a gentle, don't use a whisk, it's a spatula, and we're just folding it in. You want to make sure that you get all of the ingredients incorporated, but you don't want to break down the eggs, so you got to do it very gently. And once you can stir without finding any dry pieces, we're going to pour out into the pan, and we're going to bake it in a 350-degree oven for about 12 to 15 minutes. It doesn't take long for this cake to cook. All right. And here we go. I'm going to use my spatula to spread it out across the pan to make sure we get all the edges. And then we're going to slide it right in the oven. So while the cake for our chocolate bomb is cooking, we're going to work on our chocolate mousse. The first thing we have to do is bloom some gelatin. So I have 1 packet of unflavored gelatin that I'm going to pour in my saucepan since that's where I'll be cooking it, and a 1/4 cup of water. We are going to let this, I'm going to stir it together and then let it sit for 2 minutes and let the gelatin bloom, similar to the way you do with yeast. And then we will get started on finishing up the mousse. So our gelatin has bloomed. You can tell it's really soft now and incorporated. So now we're going to add the rest of our ingredients. I've got 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder. I have 2 tablespoons of sugar, a tablespoon of bourbon, 1/2 cup of cream, and that's the good stuff, so we should get all that out. And then a tablespoon of instant coffee. And we are going to heat this for about 2 minutes, or until all of the gelatin dissolves. And then we'll move over to our table. But we have to stir this constantly. You can't stop stirring it, otherwise the it'll burn because it's scorching. It'll scorch the bottom of the pan. So we're going to sit here and stir. Alright, looks like our gelatin has dissolved, so we're going to head on over to the table and add our melted chocolate in. So I have our gelatin and cocoa and sugar mixture that I heated up on the stove. We're going to pour it into this bowl. We want to stop the cooking process. And then we're going to add 8 ounces of bittersweet chocolate that I have melted and cooled. Stir that in real quick, and then we are going to put all of this bowl into an ice bath. That is to cool it down quickly. You want to be careful not to get any water inside the chocolate mixture. So once you see that nice glossy shiny look, we're going to take a bowl of water with ice and stick this right inside. And we're going to wait till that cools to room temperature, and then we'll finish up our mousse. So our cake is out of the oven. It took about 16 minutes. So I'm going to run a knife just along the outer edge, because remember there's parchment paper underneath that will force it out of the pan, but we want to make sure it doesn't stick to the sides either. And you have to do this while it's still hot, because once it cools, it will stick to the pan and you'll never get it up. So I'm just going to run it right along the edge, all the way around. And then I have a piece of parchment paper on my table that I've already greased up. So we are going to flip over onto that. And then just remove the parchment paper that we cooked it in and let this cool for about 15 minutes before we get to shaping. So I whipped together a cup of whipped cream, which I've done on earlier episodes, so feel free to watch. We're going to gently fold this into our chocolate mixture that is now at room temperature. And I got distracted as I was whipping cream, and we almost had butter. So we're just gently folding, mixing the two together to make this beautiful, rich, and decadent chocolate mousse. And now that our mousse is ready, we're gonna get to the assembly of our cake. So I have a 1.5 quart glass bowl that I have lined with plastic wrap, leaving a couple inches all around the edges because we're gonna wanna lift it out at some point. So, if you notice, plastic wrap all the way around. I need a knife. Okay, so we're gonna cut the cake itself into about 1-inch strips on the short side. And the pieces where the middle of my cake came out of the pan, I'm just going to use those as the edges instead of trying to force cake where it doesn't go. And I'll show you how that works. Okay, so start with the pieces like this that are longer. And we are going to put it right in the middle of the bowl. Press down. We're going to line the bowl with cake. Once you have finished lining the bowl, we're going to trim the excess off the sides. The pieces like there where it got a little uneven, we just take pieces of cake and fill in the holes. And it's easier to do this when the cake is still a little warm. It's not, I mean, it's cool enough to touch, but it's still warm enough that you can mold the cake to whatever shape you want it to be. So once we have the outside formed, I'm just going to come by and cut off these edges so that it's all, I'm going to stick that one back there to create the edge. So see, you have a nice little bowl. Now we're going to take our chocolate mousse that we made and we're going to fill our chocolate cake. And you can do other flavors. I thought at some point I might make one with chocolate and caramel. Maybe a little caramel syrup at the bottom, a little chocolate mousse, a little more caramel syrup. Because I don't know if you've noticed a theme in my baking, but I really like caramel. And I can do one of these for my husband that has like a mint chocolate mousse in the middle, because mint and chocolate are like his two favorite things. So now I'm going to take the larger pieces of cake that we have left to put them right across the top. So you want to create like this sealed vacuum of cake with chocolate mousse in the middle. So now that that's ready, we're going to put this in the refrigerator for 3 hours. We want it to get hard and make one gelatinous ball so then we can glaze it. So our chocolate bomb has been in the refrigerator for about 3 hours. Now we're going to make the glaze to go over the top. I have 4 ounces of bittersweet chocolate that we are going to finely chop. In this bowl, I have 2 tablespoons of corn syrup. So I'm going to add the chocolate to that. Now I'm going to add a half a cup of heavy cream. And a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla. And we're going to put that in the microwave. And I'm going to heat it up at 30-second increments and stir until I get all the chocolate melted and that nice glazy finish. So I microwaved our glaze 30 seconds, then 30 seconds, mixing in between, and then it took another 10 just to get that last little bit of chocolate to melt. So I have a cookie sheet with a piece of parchment and a wire rack. We're going to turn out the cake from the bowl onto the wire rack and then cover it in the glaze. All of this is to help clean up so that it is not a disaster. The cake looks a little rustic now, but it won't. Just wait. While the glaze is still warm, we are going to pour it over the cake. And the reason you want the parchment paper and the wire rack is so that any excess does not pool at the bottom and instead falls down onto the rack. And the parchment paper is so that you can just pick up the parchment and throw it away instead of creating more mess. So all I'm doing is moving the glaze around so that it gets through the whole, it covers the whole cake. And then we are going to take this, the pan, the wire rack, parchment paper, and all, and pop it back in the refrigerator for about an hour to let the glaze set. And then we'll be ready to open it up and try the chocolate bomb. So our chocolate bomb has been glazed and sitting in the refrigerator for the last hour. And now it's time to move it to its serving platter. So I have this fancy tool that moves cakes when I make layered cakes. We're going to use it for the same purpose here. And now we are ready to serve.